All right, 6 p.m. Sunday, December 27th. I'm David Edwards, president of Heron Wealth. I'd like to introduce my co-panelist, Buff Parham of Parham Associates.
How are you? Good evening.
I am good. So this is our last webinar of 2020. I'm going to speak for about 5 minutes about just some topics on my mind, and then we'll jump into some Q&A. So thank you everybody for sending in questions. And we thought we'd make it a little festive this time of the year with an actual fire. Hopefully it will last. If I have to get up and put in a log, you'll forgive me. The theme of tonight's webinar is resilience, and I'm going to start by telling a funny personal story. We have a pod. My wife Randy and I have a pod with our good friends Heron and Rashad, and so they've come up from New York for Thanksgiving. They've come up for Christmas. They'll be coming back up for Martin Luther King Day in a few weeks. And the four of us have stayed COVID-free for the whole year. We feel pretty good about that. Anyway, so they were heading up this way Christmas Eve with a car full of delicious food, case of wine, and we've known that the septic plant in our house was dubious. We had it inspected a few weeks ago. The guy said, yeah, we got to replace this thing. And we said, great, please schedule us as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, Christmas Eve morning, we woke up and there was 4 inches of really icky water backed up into our shower. And that's not cool, is it, when you're hosting guests for Christmas? So I made a quick phone call to the septic guys. Oh, their phone lines were down. I couldn't reach them. That was plan A. Plan B was I already knew where the septic plant was. We'd already discussed it. I dug out my pickaxe and my shovel, and I trenched down to the septic plant and got it trenched and flowing downhill, cleared out a lot of standing water. Pretty icky, I know, but you know, it's Christmas Eve. Well, unfortunately, it was still blocked. But I was able to reach the septic guys eventually, and when they came up, because of the work I'd already done, it was very easy for them to get a snake in there, bang out some obstruction of some kind. Maybe it was a tree root, maybe it was ice block, who knows. Got the water flowing, got the shower drained, cleaned up the bathroom. They left just as our friends arrived. Awesome. We had a fabulous Christmas Eve dinner, went to bed around midnight. Incredible storm raging outside. The next morning, there was no electricity in our house. And right now, we're not living in New York City. We're living in a pretty rural part of New York State where there's only a house every half mile or so. And we are literally the last house on electrical spur. So we grabbed our iPads, which are battery powered and connected to the internet, and dialed into the electrical grid and got ourselves an outage report. But the word was it's going to be at least a day before they can get to us. It's Christmas Day. So I said to Randy, my wife, well, let's just go back to the city and have Christmas in New York City. And she said, hell no. We're sailors. We're going to figure this out. And we did. I hustled off to the local convenience store. It was open on Christmas Day, bought 6 gallons of fresh water. We used water from the pool, the swimming pool, broke through the ice to get some buckets of water to wash dishes and flush out the toilets as needed. And then we cooked our filet mignon dinner for Christmas Day on the grill. Had another amazing meal. Went to bed at midnight. During Christmas Day, I'd actually had walked up the road, knocking on neighbors' doors to find out what their electrical situation was. We're the last house we were out. The house next to us was out, but the third house was not out. So I asked the owner if I could walk back through his fields back to our house to see if I could see a break in the line. I didn't see a break in line, but I did see a tree lining up against the wires. And so when the supervisor showed up, finally after 36 hours, I said, "Yeah, this is what I saw." He goes, "Okay, that's actually good news. What that means is that tree has created a ground. All we need to do is pop out some fuses, cut down that tree, we'll be back in business." And we were. So, resilience is the art and science of taking a bad situation and turning it around. And the reason why I wanted to talk about resilience for our last webinar of 2020 was because our clients were resilient this year and my team members were resilient this year. And you can't imagine how grateful and thankful I am for that. Let's talk about clients for a minute. 35 of our client families own businesses. We talked about this back in June. They all pivoted, adapted, innovated, did whatever it took to keep their businesses going, and some even thrived in the current environment. It was really exciting to see. And then I also want to talk about the resilience of my team. I don't think my team has ever worked this hard in all the years that I've known them. And we went to work from home mode, boom, one email back in March. We haven't seen each other physically in 10 months now. But Lucas, my portfolio manager, hammered on the portfolios, kept doing his job rebalancing, kept doing stock research. He lives close to our office. He stopped by once in a while, check on the mail. The vet operations manager continued to work with clients, get the reports out. We waved in a lot of new clients this year. A lot of other advisors are hiding under their desks. We're not. We brought in a lot of new business. She was working very hard on new account applications. Shelly, our director of financial planning, she's a bit emeritus now, but she still works with me, gives me good advice. She works with Chris, our newest advisor, actually our second newest advisor, teaching him all the tricks of the trade and how to make a good presentation for a client. Willa, our social media expert, working away in Vermont, continued to increase her skills as the year went on. And then finally, we have two new team members, which I'll mention briefly. Randy Kaufman, my wife of the last 18 weeks, also joined my firm as a partner in September. And then we have a new team member, Carla Baisong, who you'll learn more about in a week or two. She's a client concierge, and we'll talk more about her role when I introduce her. So that was really a year to remember. It started off so badly, and we are by no means home free. But when push came to shove, everybody that was a client of mine, everybody that was a team member of mine, worked their asses off and got through somehow. So I'm going to make a few more remarks about mostly about the pandemic and the vaccine situation, and then the rest of the presentation will be Q&A, and Buff will ask the questions that came in. So first off, the pandemic rages on. The numbers are terrible. It's a 9/11 every day at this point. It's remarkable how inured we become to that daily body count. Back on 9/11 in 2001, 3,000 people were killed in a day. The World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and flight, whatever it was, flight whatever, and the whole country went nuts. And we reconfigured the FBI, we reconfigured the Pentagon, we refigured special forces. We invaded two countries, because we were so angry at the death of 3,000 Americans. And right now, 3,000 Americans die every single day, and nobody seems to care at all. I'm furious personally, but So what do we know about the pandemic? Well, we saw a big grouping of people over Thanksgiving, a big surge in cases the week after Thanksgiving, a big surge in deaths this past week. We saw another big grouping of people over Christmas, which means another big wave of infections a week from now, which means another big wave of deaths a month from now. People simply won't face facts. And that's either God or nature's way of thinning the herd. I can't explain it otherwise. Why would people be so stupid? But they are. A couple of our clients actually did get COVID this past year, and thankfully they were all in good health, and thankfully they were able to get prompt medical care, and they all seem to have come through it okay. That's luck. That was just dumb luck. The vaccine is out. Already 1 million Americans have been vaccinated. Another 2 million will be vaccinated by the end of this week. That's good news, but it's going to take months for the vaccines to get across the whole country. I'm a healthy 59-year-old male. I'm on schedule to get the vaccine in June. That's the earliest I can hope to get it. I'm not reopening our office until every team member has been vaccinated. We also have a big problem with the anti-vaxxers. A lot of people think that this is a plandemic. Bill Gates is somehow using the vaccines to take over our bodies. That is unbelievable BS, but that's what people believe. And so until at least 50% of the population has been vaccinated, which might be July 1st, we're not out of the woods. And I would say even after you've had the vaccine, you still have to keep your face mask on and still practice social distancing, because you're going to run into a lot of people that have not been vaccinated. The vaccines are 95% effective, which means that even post-vaccine, you still have a 1 in 20 chance of getting sick. So at this point in time, I think September 30th is when we'll have a chance to reopen our office in Midtown, New York. We'll evaluate again around July 1st and see how things are going. And then lastly, politics. When we spoke last time, I said election, it could be election day, election week, election month. Well, now we're rolling on to month 2. Donald Trump still will not face facts, won't face reality. And he is somehow hoping that he can get Congress, the House and Senate, to overturn the popular vote where Joe Biden won by 7 million more votes, somehow overturn it and magically restore him to the presidency on January 20th. It's not going to happen. But until that idiot is out of the White House, we all are just, and this is where resilience comes into play. This guy will be gone January 21st, and hopefully we never have to think about him ever again. So those were just some super brief remarks. Let's jump into questions. Buff?
David, none of us will forget 2020 anytime soon. A tremendously tumultuous year. In your opinion, what's the single most important takeaway that we should contemplate going forward?
I think the single biggest takeaway we should contemplate going forward is the utter collapse of the Republican Party. I used to be a Republican. I voted reliably Republican in 2004. You know, I voted for Reagan. I voted for George W. the first time around. But by 2004, I started to have some bad feelings about the Republican Party. I began to feel like those people were crazy and a danger to all. And it's only gotten worse over the last 20 years. And what infuriates me is how eager the Republican Party was to blow up the deficit by trillions of dollars in 2018 to give tax cuts to the wealthiest 1% and to corporations. But right now can barely stomach giving $600 checks to American families. Let's think about what $600 buys for the average American family. It buys 1 week of groceries for a family of 4. It doesn't cover rent, doesn't cover car payments, doesn't cover health insurance. It covers food for 7 days. And that's the most the Republican Party can come up with in the midst of this pandemic. A lot of people think I'm a Democrat. Nope. Nope. I am a pragmatist. I'm an independent. I'm somewhat of a libertarian. I don't care how much pot you smoke. I don't care how many abortions you have. I don't care who you marry. None of that is my business. But I do care about running the country on a sound economic footing. And I do object to the 4 years of sloth and indifference and theft that the current Republican Party has ignored and accommodated. And that's the biggest takeaway of 2020. The Republicans have got to have a come to Jesus moment and do a lot better, or they'll be a minority party for good starting in 4 years. Next question.
What do you see happening with inflation, economic growth, and bond yields next year?
Yeah, so all tied together, right? Right now we're in a recession. We've been in a recession since April. We are starting to rebound on the other side. It will still take a couple years before the economic output of this country is higher than it was in January 2020. I do think that the economy will rebound at least 5% next year. That's good news. I do believe that bond yields will remain absolutely at the floor. 0.0 for Fed funds, 2% for the 10-year Treasury, which means that mortgages are about 2.5%. It means it's almost impossible to make money above inflation investing in bonds right now. And then inflation, when you have 10 million to 15 million Americans unemployed or underemployed, when you have real estate markets like New York City in free fall right now, when demand is way down, inflation is just not something I spend any time worrying about. Deflation is actually a bigger concern.
What's your outlook for the price of oil? And what do you think about renewable?
Yeah. Price of oil. Even a couple of years ago, oil was $100 or more a barrel. In April, it fell to negative dollars. For one crazy afternoon, somebody would pay you $20 a barrel to take it away. We were so deep in oil.
Yeah.
All of the OPEC countries have rebalanced their production and output. Oil prices rebounded and stabilized around $37 a barrel, 30% or 35% of what it was, 2 years ago, which has big implications for the Middle states, Saudi Arabia. They're very dependent on oil. Also big implications for Russia. They're very dependent on the cost of oil. So they're suffering right now. Meanwhile, for Americans, well, we got a lucky break. Gas is $2.15 or $2.25. It's very cheap. I remember $5 gas not too many years ago. But in the long run, I see carbon-based fuel sources becoming an ever smaller part of the energy output. And I'm not saying that as some sort of Green Deal, activist. I'm saying that as somebody who's watched renewable energy first surpass nuclear a couple years ago, and most recently surpass coal. Right now, coal is about 11% of U.S. output. Coal is about 11%. Renewables are about 12%. I commented earlier this year about flying back from Utah, and as I crossed over the Great Lakes and over the land of Michigan, state of Michigan, looking down and seeing a windmill in every farmer's field for hundreds of miles. That was eye-opening. So as batteries get better, as transmission lines get better, as turbines get better, the cost of energy, of wind energy dropping, the cost of solar panels dropping, the cost of excavating coal is still rising. And you might remember that Trump was all about rebuilding the coal economy. Well, 4 years ago, there were 60,000 Americans employed in coal. Now there's 40,000. If I was a coal miner right now, I would get out there and retrain installing solar panels or installing windmills. That's the energy of the future. So it may be that we never get energy back above $37 a barrel, 45, 50. It may be someday we might have it in the museum. It's like, oh yeah, remember this important energy source? Just like wood was an important energy source 200 years ago, and now nobody uses wood to heat their homes. Oh, except for me when our we had no heat.
We've seen a range of impact on industry sectors, some being more vulnerable than others. Air travel, hospitality, entertainment, retail. Where do you see the horses coming in terms of recovery?
Yeah. So what we've seen in this past year is that the industries that were dependent on face-to-face contact with people got clobbered. Movie theaters, restaurants, airlines. And something like a third of all American businesses failed this past year. Many of them were small restaurants. Not in 2021, but in 2022, I think you'll see a lot of rebound, particularly in the restaurant sector. The way a restaurant gets started is that there's a chef, and a chef goes out and finds a bunch of investors, and they throw $500,000 together, $1 million together, and open a restaurant, and hopefully it succeeds. Most times it's a pretty terrible investment, but that's how restaurants get started. And people will be desperate for eating out and concerts and sporting events in 2022, but it's going to be a long slog till we get there. Other industries thrived this year. Zoom, Peloton, Amazon, DoorDash, right? Food deliveries. Every crisis creates opportunity for somebody. And our position is to not get too overly enthusiastic about chasing after the fad stocks. We know that one day the restaurants will come back. We know airlines will come back someday. We want to sort of participate broadly in the economy. A company like Amazon, just hoovered up all of the sales of all of the local stores that went out of business all across the country, and it'd be hard to claw that back. So we'll see.
Here's a silver lining question. What long-term changes do you see in the economy that could be called positive in the wake of the pandemic?
Well, What I hope comes out of this is a renewed interest in science. This is not the first pandemic we've had since 1918. We've actually had scares with other potentially disastrous diseases in the last 10 years. Ebola, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, SARS, Southern, I forget what's something, a respiratory syndrome. And with a little bit of luck, they were less infectious, and a lot of skill. These diseases were caught in place. Ebola is terribly infectious, and there were 2 people with Ebola, one in Texas and one in Massachusetts. And the Obama administration, which believed in science, was all over it, caught it quickly and tamped it out. I was going down to Texas back then when the Ebola scare was on, and one of my clients said, "David, aren't you worried about the Ebola?" And I said, "No. In Texas, they have concealed carry and stand your ground rules. I'm worried about bullet flu." So the new administration, the super good news is that they have all been there before. Many of them are veterans of the Obama-Biden administration. They know what to do, and they're not egotists, and they're not, pushing some crazy agenda that's actually pretty bad news for the rest of us. It's not just dealing with the next infectious disease. It's also taking a real hard pragmatic look at climate change. Only people with the deepest blinkers on really believe that the climate is not significantly warmer now than it was 20, 30 years ago. And a warmer climate means bigger forest fires in California, bigger hurricanes in Florida. Climate change has serious and immediate economic consequences, and hopefully the scientists will be able to actually start addressing those things.
You mentioned one of these earlier, but what about Tesla, Airbnb, DoorDash, even Bitcoin? These stocks are up huge this year. Should we be buying into those?
Yeah. It's so interesting to look at a handful of stocks that are up 200%, 400%, 690% this year. And most of them are companies that we won't buy because they violate rules that we have around what makes a good investment. Tesla, I love the cars. I love the battery technology even more. It's going to be super impressive somewhere down the road. But right now they're just losing buckets of money, and that's not a good investment as far as I'm concerned. Airbnb, right? Huge IPO, huge rally. And the rally is based on the returned, revenue growth next year, not even this year, next year. Well, we don't invest based on fantasies. We invest based on really boring numbers. And so I'm very happy to let a company like Tesla go by or Airbnb go by, because 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, investing in those kind of companies is generally a losing proposition. One of my favorite companies of all time is a company called Sealed Air. And they make the most boring product you can imagine. When you get a box from Amazon and there's a bubble system wrapped around it, that's Sealed Air. All they do is sell machines that take plastic and blow it in bubbles, and then you stuff it into boxes and shove it out the door. And I've made more money off of that boring little company than almost anything else in the last 10 years, because they are a huge part of getting Amazon boxes delivered to you safely.
The supply chain. Well, given all that we've been through this year, what advice would you offer to a recent college graduate as he or she begins to chart their career in this new environment?
Yeah. So if you graduated this year, it's a pretty daunting environment. Trying to get a job interview over Zoom, when the HR departments are all working remotely. Trying to get training when all the training people are working remotely. But I'll say this, I graduated from college in 1983 in the midst of what was called the Volcker recession. Prior to Paul Volcker becoming the Fed chair, inflation was soaring, interest rates were very high, Fed funds was about 12%, a mortgage was about 15%, a car loan was about 21%. And Volcker put the economy into a deep recession for 2 years to kill off inflation once and for all. And that set us up for the next it's close to 40 years now of pretty reasonable economic growth in a low inflationary environment. So I graduated from college back then, and I had 20 interviews, got 20 rejections, spent my first summer after college tutoring and bartending. But I took some classes in accounting and finance to stall for time and parlayed that into an entry-level job at Morgan Stanley, which set me up essentially for the rest of my career. So if you're a recent graduate, if you can't get a job, if you can't even get it, just do anything. Anything that brings in some money, that you got to get up in the morning, have a good attitude, get paid, and bide your time until the opportunities return. And also, it's totally cool to drop in and get some, if you're a liberal arts graduate, for example, that's what I was, history, math, take something practical, computer science, process logic controller programming, which is what automates factories. Take one class at a time and keep your ears open and drop, if you can, drop by the Career Center or log into their portal, and eventually you will get back on track. It's going to be harder. You're going to have to work harder to get started, but the opportunities are always there.
Great advice. Drum roll, please. What is your surprise prediction for 2021?
My surprise prediction for 2021 is the return of office culture. So there's been a lot of conversation about we'll never go back to the office again. We'll live on Zoom forever. And I believe that by end of 21, beginning of 2022, all these offices are going to fill back up again. And the reason why I say that is, number one, it's exhausting to be on Zoom all day long. My whole team can attest to that. It's just like I get motion sick after a while looking at the Zoom camera, right? It just, number two, it's very hard to train new people over Zoom. So I've got a pretty good team in place. They're all self-managing. I'm bringing in new people. I want to train them. It's one thing to have you sitting next to me or 3 feet away and listening to my conversations, and I can answer a question on the fly. It's another thing to have a set up a time and log in and get over Zoom, and just so slow and so tedious. And then the last reason why I think people want to get back to the office is if we're working remotely and you're out of sight and out of mind, where do your promotions come from? You don't get promoted because you're working. I mean, I'm working, in the Berkshires. You might be working in Hawaii or working in, Ethiopia, right? But if you're that far away from where the promotions are, you're not going to get them. So I would feel that by 2022, all these offices are going to start filling up again, and with that, all of the subordinate services, transportation, mass transit, restaurants, and then the other thing is people want separation between their work life and their personal life. When you're working at home, it becomes a 24/7 situation. You're always on. And when I had a Midtown office, when I was done at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., I was done. I could go out with my wife, have a good dinner, go home and walk our dog, watch the Daily Show, go to bed, and then the next morning be refreshed and ready for the battle. And these days I have to sort of block out a whole day where I'm not taking phone calls, I'm not doing work, I'm just doing nothing to get my brain able to then work the next day. So that's the big prediction, is the return of the office culture.
We are social animals after all.
We are. So that brings us to 6:30, right on schedule. Buff, I know you had your own electrical issues yesterday, so that just seems to be the nature of the world. But I wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. One more programming note. We've been doing these webinars monthly since March, and that's been very important, I think, for the moment. But now that things are relaxing, calming down a little bit, we're going to switch to a new schedule of every other month. And so the next webinar will be in February. I'll schedule that later. And we're going to try and move away from topical webinars and get back into informational webinars. For example, I think my next webinar is going to be around what behavioral finance is and how our caveman brain helps us make good decisions or bad decisions. And so that will be, I think, a different approach. As always, happy to take questions. My email address, in case no one has it, is davidedwards@Heron, Heron, wealth.com. My office line is 347-580-5288. That rolls directly to my cell phone, which is 917-705-3893. Everybody have a great night.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.